The telephone, television, radio, and postal systems are essential communication infrastructures for life as we know it. But as the world enters a new millennium, it appears as if the Internet, begun in 1969 as an experimental computer network, is gradually absorbing many of their functions. The Internet can do that because it was built with an open architecture. It's a superhighway with plenty of on-ramps, lanes, and no traffic restrictions. It handles whatever comes down the road. This generality of purpose is the brilliance of its design.
We were very conscious that we were opening up new territory and that rather than pick very limited applications, that we ought to lay a foundation that was as broad and open-ended as possible.
Inclusion guided the network's development. Anyone could contribute ideas about its use and how to improve it. Ideas were offered as requests for comments, so everyone would feel free to discuss and criticize them.
I wanted to emphasize the point that we were not making assertions or edicts, but that we were trying to create a dialogue, that we were putting forth ideas and that it was supposed to engender responses. And so we made the simplest possible rules. Anybody could write anything they want, that it had no status, that it got whatever credibility it got from its content, not from the fact that it had been blessed by somebody.
There's a kind of internet culture which grew out of the academic community. What you find is that there's a tradition of sharing of knowledge, that people will add to it. They will find mistakes and bugs and they'll fix them, they'll tell you about them and everybody else. The rate of evolution, the rate at which of new functionality can be added is very higher, much higher, simply because so many people are contributing to it.
By 1972, the ARPANET had fewer than 25 sites online, yet more were coming. What sparked the increase was the first International Conference on Computers and Communication, sponsored by ARPA as a coming-out party for its network. Bob Metcalfe, fresh from MIT and Harvard, was in charge of compiling a list of just what the network could do.
So all I did was contact all the people who had computers on the ARPANET, and there weren't very many, like 19 or 23 or some number, and said, do you have something interesting that's going on at your host that you'd like other people to access over the net?
Metcalfe could only find a few esoteric uses for the fledgling network, but at this early stage, that was enough for an impressive demonstration.
By the time of this demo, I could find 19, imagine that, 19 different things that you could do on the net. And they had a program that pretended to be a psychotic. They had games that you could play. They had demonstrations of symbolic manipulation of mathematical formulas. They had more technical things like remote job entry for submitting jobs from one computer to the next and getting the results back.
But demonstrations sometimes go wrong, and at the wrong time.
Well, imagine a graduate student, big red beard. I put together this book, and in walks 10 AT&T executives, all in pinstripe suits. And they needed someone to give them a tour of the ARPANET, so I was the natural choice, having done the book. So they gave me these 10 executives, and I started giving them the tour. And right in the middle of the tour, the ARPANET, for the only time during the 2 or 3 days of the demonstration, the net crashed, the computer, the IMP, crashed, and the demo froze. And here's this poor graduate student having worked on this for several years and it being his life's work, and he turns around and these 10 AT&T executives thought it was funny. In fact, were somewhat amused and happy that it had crashed, because this was very reassuring to their lifestyle and their technology, that this packet switching was just too unreliable and they didn't have to worry about it. And the fact that they were amused angered me greatly. Angered me. In fact, to this day, many years later, I still have a thing against telephone companies for that reason.
After the conference, the development of computer networks took off. Networks soon began to multiply throughout the Western world. The National Science Foundation made being on their network a requisite for receiving grant money. Soon, other networks emerged. There were LANs, or local area networks, to link computers throughout offices. and WANs, or wide area networks, to link computers across buildings or campuses. But each new network was like a foreign country speaking its own language. Could disparate networks be interconnected to make an internet work? In 1973, Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn teamed up to develop a set of rules or procedures known as the TCP/IP protocol that, if followed by different computer networks, would allow them to pass their message packets back and forth.
It's protocolon, which actually is the term used to describe a little piece of papyrus that goes on the front of a scroll. But the protocolon is, in fact, the little thing that tells you what's in the rest of the scroll. We use that term because packets have headers on them at the front that say where they're going, where they came from, and what information they contain, and then comes the information itself. And we thought that represented a protocol, too.
The TCP/IP protocol enabled the networks to interconnect. Cerf and Kahn called the computer in the network that would know the protocol and thus be able to communicate across networks the gateway.
This puzzle has some pieces already on the board. I had computers of various kinds. I had networks of various kinds. And I wasn't allowed to mess around with the networks. The only place that could know were the outside of the networks. Well, what's outside the networks? The host computers are outside. And then I needed something that would interconnect the networks to each other. And as Bob and I discussed all this, we concluded we needed something that we called a gateway that knew how to talk to each of the networks it was connected to, which could be 2 or 3 or 4, and could encapsulate envelope packets coming from the host computers into packets going through the underlying networks.
Others proposed different protocols, but if there wasn't a common one for all networks to follow, a common language, there would be several internets instead of a single unified one. Finally, in 1983, after 10 years of refinement and bureaucratic haggling, TCP/IP was adopted as the universal standard, marking a milestone in the development of the Internet, a common network of interconnected networks.
If we have enough in common, if we hold enough in common, then we can communicate. If we don't hold enough in common, it's much harder. So, in fact, the reason that the network works at all is that we have worked very hard to create all this commonality so that we share enough knowledge to make it possible to convey information to each other.
The ARPANET was developed as a tool for defense research and restricted to select universities and think tanks engaged in government projects, not individuals or businesses. For this reason, private networks like Prodigy, CompuServe, and what came to be called America Online started to spring up where individuals could join in. Still, the Internet had not reached Main Street, USA, but a major milestone in its young life was about to see all that change. Unlike technological breakthroughs that swelled the use of computer networks, this milestone was political. It would unleash the full power of free enterprise and American ingenuity and bring a worldwide communications network into the home and office. The amount of data traveling across the Internet doubles every 100 days.